As long as you are convinced you have never done anything, you can never do anything. Malcolm X. Welcome to the We Don't Believe You podcast series. Our mission is to neutralize and dispel the false narratives, negative images, and disparaging stereotypes that have been perpetuated about Black people through various media outlets for centuries. Each week, we will highlight stories of Black excellence, greatness, and success of the past, present, and future, all of which share one common trait. They chose not to believe the negative images or stereotypes that said they couldn't succeed, but instead achieved massive success in spite of them. And now, here's your host, Brian McCoy.
Peace, and welcome to another episode of the We Don't Believe You podcast series, where our mission is to dispel and reverse the false negative narrative and the negative stereotypes that have been perpetuated about Black people for centuries in America. We do this by highlighting positive Black images of individuals that chose not to believe the false narrative, but instead chose to succeed in spite of it. Our next guest is a shining example of such a gentleman. Our next guest was raised in Mount Vernon, New York, has overcome tremendous obstacles and adversity to reach a level of success uncommon. He's a gentleman whose desire, ambition, and determination to impact society and the world was so much bigger than his adversities. After being convicted of felony drug charges and after being shot, this gentleman went on to get his associate's degree from Bronx Community College, where he helped lead the student strike of 1991. He received his bachelor's degree from Amherst College and his doctoral degree in sociology from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, all while remaining active in numerous activist formations. He's an independent scholar, an educator, social entrepreneur, demographic analyst, grant and research report writer, and a professor. He's a personal friend and a friend to the family and the show. A shining example of it's not where you're from, but where you're at. And it's not how you start, but how you finish. Please welcome Dr. Robert Baskerville.
Thank you, Brian. It's an honor to be on the show this evening.
And it's a pleasure to have you, and always good to see you. So first and foremost, welcome, and thank you for taking the time to be here.
Yes, good brother. Mm-hmm.
So I guess the overarching question, at least in my mind, is how does one go from being in the streets and the drug game and everything that comes along with that to a PhD in sociology? But I guess we would have to take it in bite-sized pieces. So to begin, I noticed that you were not born in Mount Vernon, but you were raised there. How did that come about?
So this is, part of the larger backstory to my life. And I was actually born in Harlem Hospital in the late 1960s during the long, hot summers that left the urban centers here in the United States afire. And I was immediately placed up for adoption by my mother. My biological mother was a white woman, and my father, who was African American, and I would not think it would take a lot of imagination to realize that it might have had something to do with the tortured and tension-filled race relations that had led to conflict all across the nation, had shaped and formed my family dynamic as well. And so I spent the first 3 or 4 years of my life in foster care. My father waged a legal battle to get me removed from foster care, and eventually when I was taken out and he got custody of me, we relocated to Roselle, New Jersey, where I spent maybe 2 or 3 years of my earliest memories at.
So how much time did you actually spend in the foster care system?
Well, I mean, these are very dim memories at best for me, and so that speaks to just how early in age at which I was removed from foster care system. But, best guess is 3 to 4 years, somewhere 4 to 5, probably by the time I was removed by my father.
Okay, and so what was the transition to Mount Vernon like for you from everything else that you had just experienced, or wherever else where you were living, or from Roselle, New Jersey?
Well, I mean, at the time, I did enjoy a relatively joyful early childhood in Roselle, New Jersey, but my immediate departure was marked by a serious argument between my mother and father. And me and my dad left. We left. We relocated to Mount Vernon, and essentially we sort of formed the Black Brady Bunch. But maybe I should say that the driving force behind the decision for my mother and father to split up was internal domestic tensions between the two of them. Some of which had to do with the fact that my father, was a bit of a rolling stone. He was a successful musician who was the front man of a band that performed in the tri-state area and allowed him to earn a living. And like many front men in bands, the women loved him, and so there was partly that. But I think also, with something that further compounded the problems that they were having was that her father, my biological grandfather, was a deeply bigoted guy, and apparently of Polish background, and apparently could not bear the thought of his daughter giving birth to and raising a love child with this black dude. And so between those two forces, one day it really reached a head. My father and biological mother, had an argument. And, as so often happens, as we see on the silver screen, voices were raised. Vows were made, to never see one another again. And that was pretty much it. My father relocated, and he resettled into Mount Vernon when I was about the age of 7, and to start life anew with the lady that I call Mom, Hyla Parker. And basically they formed the Black Brady Bunch. My father had me, and my mother, Hyla, had 3 children of her own, my 2 siblings, Sean, my sister, and my 2 brothers, Frank and Parrish, who are, I will mention now, are both deceased now.
Okay, my condolences. So that I understand, or so that everyone understands it correctly, so you were put up for adoption, you said, immediately at birth?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And then your father waged a legal battle to get you out of that system, got you out of that system, and then went back, and you and your mother were reunited, the 3 of you.
Yes, I would imagine. I mean, listen, as is true of any relationship, you try to hold on, especially when you have children together. I think my father tried to salvage their relationship despite the problems that they were experiencing, but at a certain point it became unbearable and untenable, and so he had to leave.
Okay. Did you have just growing up, and I want to get to Mount Vernon, but there's so many other questions now. You
just gotta edit it, that's all, man. You're gonna have to edit it, that's all.
So did you get to so did you have memories when you got to Mount Vernon? Did you have memories of your mother or the life with you, your mother, and your father together?
Sure, I had about maybe 2 years or so of, joy-filled memories. Not so much of my mother, I want to say, but rather the larger life that we had built in Roselle, New Jersey. I was part of a thriving community of little kids who were doing all the things that little kids do. But my father had become especially attached to the head of the local football team, the Pop Warner team. And so I think it was the Wyatts, if I'm not mistaken. So, I had a group of interracial kids. It was a pretty interracial community, at least neighborhood that I immediately grew up in. And so, had all the fun, all the joy that you would expect a little 5-6-year-old boy to have. And surely, felt a lot of fondness for those family and friends that I had there, and so there was some pain, of course, that accompanied just relocating, replanning your home.
So in time, I guess one could, I guess, speculate or guess that in time, those memories just kind of faded and you acclimated to a new life altogether.
Yes. So when I moved to Mount Vernon, not surprisingly, I had a lot of memories of my past and friends that I missed, but and actually, I brought with me a few belongings. One item in particular really symbolized those ties. It was a large a stuffed donkey that I had won at a local fair, and I brought it with me to the city of Mount Vernon. It had a tear in it, and I could remember for about the first 6, 7, 8 months, sort of tending to this donkey, which was the last tangible memory of my ties to my, community family back in New Jersey. And eventually I remember making the decision to discard of it, and kind of knowing that along with ridding myself of the physical donkey, in a way, I was leaving behind an earlier chapter of life, and had come to terms with that, and was at peace with that.
So did you maintain contact, any type of contact at all with your mother, or did you go back to?
No. So my mother and father never, my father and my biological mother never maintained any kind of active contact that involved me. I do remember maybe on one occasion, after I relocated to Mount Vernon, my biological mother reaching out and asking about me and seeing how I was doing. But to be honest, I think the anguish that she probably felt in giving up a son, and sort of overriding maternal instincts to hold on to children that you've given birth to, probably to keep constant contact with me probably would have been a painful reminder of her own shortfall, I think, which is something that she probably wanted to do. And in addition to that, man, listen, the demands of everyday life will cause people to, prioritize survival versus, some of these deeper sentimental issues that we certainly have to wrestle with and that are important to us. But between those factors, I think she decided that it was just a little bit easier for her to go forward with her life, and to kind of put things, to come to peace with the terms that her and my father had made, and to trust that my father was capable of making decisions that would ensure, that I grew to be an independent and, young man. I was going to come out all right.
Okay. So do you, over the course of it, and obviously we can't see psychological things that happen to us, but would you say that your father kind of being the taking charge in that regard with actually going through the legal system to get you, I would imagine that kind of set in your mind a really positive image of black men. So basically you didn't have the image of the deadbeat fatherless. You didn't have that type of image because your father actually fought for you.
I had a very loving, caring father who attended to my needs throughout the entirety of my life that I was fortunate to have him with me. So my dad was a very loving father. He, not as is attested to, not only in the fact that he fought a legal battle at considerable cost to himself in order to get custody of me, but in addition, the kind of care, concern, hard work that he put into raising me and my 3 other siblings, Frank, Sean, and Parrish, when he relocated to Mount Vernon. Him and my the person who I'll call my adoptive mother, my mother Hyla, they were co-leaders of a band that served as the profession, as part of the music profession that they earned a living, where they earned their living for probably like the first 10, 15 years or so of my life. And they were quite successful, were able to put 4 kids through private school in the 1970s. We were all 2.5 years apart, 3 years apart essentially. So all of us were in school at the same time. The Sacred Heart School in the city of Mount Vernon. I did some numbers, ran some numbers the other day, like $100. I don't know, tuition. I remember numbers like 100, $75, $100 tuition, $75 back in 1974. That was a considerable sum of money. I think they would have putting up at least like $2,500 a month to put me and my brothers and sister through private school. So my parents deeply cared for me. I will say, man, listen, I got to say that really, man, like my upbringing is the total polar opposite of the stereotype of neglectful, dysfunctional black families. Not only did I have a dad who loved me tremendously, I had a mom who, thought the world of me and the rest of my brothers and sisters, and they made us a priority. And we lived in a very well organized, well maintained, well structured household where our parents were involved in our lives and, both in our academic lives and our lives outside the classroom, our extracurricular lives as well. They helped to found the football team, the Mount Vernon Razorbacks, along with a number of other black families in the city of Mount Vernon. In the 1970s, Mount Vernon, like so many other cities across the nation, was going through white flight, and so there was a clear succession, ethnic racial secession going on in the city, and the Mount Vernon's black population soon came to predominate civic life in the city. And my pops, my moms, and several other families, including the Prices, the Bradfords, the Edwards family, all came together in about 76 or so and founded the Mount Vernon Razorbacks. So this was just one example of all the love, encouragement, support that I got from my family. It's really hard for me to overstate it, man. I got to tell you, like, as we recall our childhood, one of the memories that is indelibly imprinted on on our minds is just how spectacular our Christmases would be. Like you hear a lot of kids tell stories, both black, white, and others, tell stories of, Spartan Christmas, where there wasn't a lot of joy nor toys because parents couldn't afford them. And my parents, man, we had everything. Our living room would be at least like 100 gifts under the tree for all of us. So I had a spectacular childhood. Spectacular.
That's a beautiful story. It's a beautiful story.
And I should say, Brian, I'm sorry, let me add that
Sure.
it was not only my immediate nuclear family, but in addition, we had an extended family that was also loving and supportive. As it turned out, we lived in the Heights, which is a lower middle class enclave in Mount Vernon, not too far from the borderline of Pelham, which is one of the more affluent, mostly white townships in Mount Vernon. And the home that I grew up in was owned by my grandfather. My grandmother and grandfather were part of that generation of Southerners who had migrated to New York as part of the Great Migration. They came here in the early 1950s. Eventually, my grandfather landed a job up at Terrytown, General Motors in Terrytown, New York, where he started as a line worker and eventually became a foreman. My grandmother started out as a domestic worker, I should say, when she arrived in New York, and actually served as a domestic worker to one of the presidents of Sarah Lawrence College. Eventually, though, she completed her bachelor's degree from the College of New Rochelle, and then went on to retire to a lifelong service in the Department of Social Services in Westchester County before retiring sometime in the 1990s. So I had a very successful multi-generational family, and my success, to whatever degree I do have success, it's thanks to the support that I got from all the generations in my family, not just my mother and father.
Okay. So success, that concept of success and watching and seeing black success and black excellence, that wasn't anything you had to discover on your own. You grew up in it.
I was surrounded by role models of successful black people all the time, whether it was in my local whether it was in my immediate household, in the person of my mother and father, who were successful musicians, and then made the transition to other occupations equally effectively, successfully. My mother, as I said, my father went on to become a auto worker at General Motors. My mother went back to school, got her associate's degree in nursing, and went on to become a registered nurse. And and then my grandparents, were role models. And then I have an uncle who's a retired county police officer. I have an aunt who's a retired county civil worker. My other uncle is a successful businessman, and so all of them were models of success in their own right. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so success for you wasn't really like a strange. It was almost an expectation. Your success was almost an expectation, given that you were immersed in it.
Absolutely. People around me, like when I went to church, man, and the deacons would call me Reverend. My uncle would call me Senator. People had high expectations for me from an early age, for me and all my brothers and sisters, to be honest with you. My entire generation. So we were a family raised with high aspirations and high expectations.
So the story gets better and better. Mm-hmm. Just to, I guess, just go back to something else that raised another question is, and obviously this calls for speculation and you wouldn't really know, but do you think that your mother being white and then your mother, I guess, for lack of better words, abandoning you, do you feel that impacted your perspective or perception of white people and or women?
Well, I mean, that's a great question, a perennial question that sociologists have struggled with, academically, but also, personally. I've had an opportunity to give it some thought, and I think my abandonment, and I will call it an abandonment, one that left no lasting harm so far as I know, but I'll call it an abandonment. And just to be honest with you, I think it affected me in the following way, that I have oftentimes in my romantic life showed almost a desperate need to be loved, and the woman that I love hard, and so I've often asked myself, yo son, why you not love so hard like this, man? This is too much. And I've wondered to what extent it has to do with the fear of loss of the love of a woman in particular, that my mother's decision to place me in a foster home was in some respects, right? So I've thought about that. I mean, look, I've also thought about, how my early circumstances have influenced my relationship and intuitive posture towards white people. And I will say this because I think this is an important question. It seems to me to be undoubtedly the case that the template for black people's emotional relationship towards whites is laid down in early childhood. To the extent that black people suffer serious traumas at the hands of whites, I think it leaves a lasting imprint on their emotional makeup, and it becomes the basis for a deeply ingrained distrust that's hard to overcome. Right? I have given this consideration, not just in a casual way, but it's central to some of the scholarly work that I do, and part of my explanation for why African American intellectuals take the ideological stances that they do. Whether you're a nationalist who deeply distrusts whites, whether you're an integrationist who sees some possible way to salvage black-white relationships, or whether you're something in between, it's often that initial emotional encounter that you have during childhood that's going to determine whether there's trust. And I mention that because I think the fact that my mother did place me, my biological mother did place me in foster care, would lead one to conclude that it's likely that I would harbor some bitterness and resentment towards whites. And I don't, Brian, and I'll tell you the reason here. I'll have to speculate because I don't have the actual facts of my earliest years ready to recall from memory. But what I imagine is that whatever kind of damage my biological mother might have done to me, it was offset by the love and support that I received in the foster care system at the earliest ages of my life. I was placed in the New York Foundling Center, I believe is the correct name. And from what I understand, this was a foster care organization that was run for many years by, I believe, Catholic nuns. And I just have to imagine that somehow or the other, those nuns found a way to, they found me endearing, which will come as no surprise to your audience members. Look at me. I had some pictures. I would show you some pictures. Look at him. Oh, he's so cute. But I imagine that they found something endearing, some endearing quality to me, and treated me in a kind, loving way. And in that sense, I think that they instilled in me a unbroken kind of trust and optimism in other people, because generally I'm a pretty trusting guy, almost to the point of being naive. I think my sister would tell me he's gullible. You don't want him. So and part of the evidence for this, man, and I should share this with you, part of the evidence of this is in the remarkable degree of, I'll say intellectual cognitive development that I showed at a very early age. We've spoken before, I've shared some of the chapters of my life with you off air. What I did not tell you is the incident that my father was fond of recounting when he learned I could read before he passed away in 2011. And he would love to tell the story of how him and I were driving on the Jersey Turnpike, which he often did as he traveled back and forth from Mount Vernon to the venues that him and my mom were going to perform at, or to go to rehearsal with his bandmates. And most of the band members were in Jersey, and him and my mom would often travel to Jersey. Sometimes they'd bring me and my brothers with them. And one day it was me and my dad on the highway, and I started reading out the signage to him. And, he just loved to recount how, son, I was astonished. I couldn't believe it. This guy is reading? What? Oh, no. And so it was, in that sense, I was a bit precocious, and had at least developed reading, skills beyond what my father's expectations of what was normal. But I think that does speak to the quality of the care that I did receive at the hands of the nurses who were at the New York Foundling Center at that time. And so perhaps that's why, to be honest with you, I generally don't harbor any kind of bitterness, resentment, distrust of whites as a whole. But some kids would, some black kids would have.
Okay. That is really, the thing is, so how was so kind of transitioning into Mount Vernon life. When you got to Mount Vernon, what was life like for you? What was it like? So if everyone that's never been to Mount Vernon, never heard of it.
Right.
Take everyone to Mount Vernon in the what would have been the 1970s, 80s.
Right. So Mount Vernon is a small bedroom community, which is located on the northeast border of the Bronx, and it is at the time, unlike the big city, the neighborhoods are not tied together through a system of public transportation that includes a subway or an active bus fleet. Instead, it's a series of neighborhoods that were tied together, especially for kids and adolescents at the time, through the streets that you'd have to travel up and down on the streets. So I grew up as I said before, in a middle class enclave that was had transitioned to almost an entirely black population down in the heights of Mount Vernon. Mount Vernon's nickname is the City of Homes. And so, in contrast to the architectural landscape of the big city, where, many of your listeners probably grew up to one extent or the other, there's almost primarily homes in Mount Vernon, with the exception of a couple of square blocks on the south side, maybe about 10 or so square blocks on the south side where you had large numbers of multifamily buildings. Mount Vernon was overwhelmingly homes. And at the time, my world consisted of, firstly, my school, Sacred Heart, my schoolmates in Sacred Heart, my immediate playmates, kids who I grew up with in the neighborhood, and then any other kind of sports activities that I may have been involved in. And my life circulated around those three main centers, and in all cases, it was, and I should add my church, Shiloh Baptist Church, that I attended regularly on Sundays. And between those four main centers, life was beautiful. It was copacetic. It was a great life. I don't know, maybe if I should describe Sacred Heart. I don't know.
Sure, why not?
So yeah, I mean, for one, I was somewhat sheltered. Me and my brothers and sisters were somewhat sheltered because we were spared the kind of hardships that kids often experience when they go off to public schools. We went to a small Catholic school that only had 8 classes in it, one for each grade, and maybe about 20, 30 kids per class. And so we attended class with the same classmates throughout almost the entire duration of our primary school years. I arrived in the city of Mount Vernon, I started in the 2nd grade, and I went to school with the same kids until 8th grade. So we were a large, we were a very close-knit group of friends, and all of our parents were actively involved in our lives, and so we had our own class rituals, which would have included regularly attending birthday parties of one classmate or the next, and one that was a really annual shindig soiree was Mark Wentz. Mark Wentz's birthday party around June, first 2 weeks in June, and every year we would go there and party down in the basement, and his mom would chaperone the whole thing, oversee the whole thing, or sometimes we would go to the Skate Key in New Rochelle, and my parents, who owned a van at this point, would pick up all the kids who wanted to go. It might be 10, 12 of us, and so this was sort of typical for how we lived then. I should say, man, I gotta say, we went outside, we played every day. I grew up right across the street from a large green space that abuts the highway, the Hutchinson River Parkway, highway. And all the kids in the neighborhood would go out. We played touch football, or tackle in the mud, softball, baseball, ride our dirt bikes, kickball, just the whole. So I don't even know what to say. It was wonderful. I'm gonna keep on saying it was wonderful.
See, that's like every time you say something, it just raises another question. So so as you've stated, you grew up in a loving, supportive household. Sounds like kind of all your needs were met, most of your wants were met.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
So the question is, well, let me ask you this: did you graduate from high school in Mount Vernon?
I did. I did graduate from high school in Mount Vernon, just barely, I should admit.
So what was your first, given the loving and supportive and caring environment you grew up in, what was your first interaction with drugs or the streets? And how did that happen?
Right. So I should say that my first encounter with drugs was just casual marijuana use. I mean, I should just say that. By the time the culture of marijuana, if you will, weed smoking, has been deeply entrenched in the black community for decades, and other communities for that matter, not at all uncommonplace. And so even in the 1980s, I graduated, I went to high school in 1981, and just as I graduated, the first time I ever encountered drugs was when I graduated from 8th grade. And, we smoked some weed at the graduation party we had. So at that point, I became a regular casual marijuana user. I should note that for all the heads who are listening in, they will probably recall that towards the middle of the 1980s, blunts had already become something of a fad in the black community. And so, I could remember regularly rolling up blunts of weed using White Owl or, whatever other cigars were popular. So, that
Phillies, Dutch Masters,
Phillies, all that stuff. So, I mean, I don't think that's really what you want to know. What you're really asking about is, when did I really become involved in the drug trade?
Well, that too. I mean, that's another important question, but
okay.
Is really just I was just wondering how you got exposed to drugs, period. Just given the household that you described, but it was just casual marijuana use as it happens in our community. Just wasn't a big deal, no big deal.
Nah, it wasn't a big deal. Surely there were adults who accepted marijuana use, and surely there were people who were closer to my age. We're talking about 13, 14. Around this age, it's not uncommon for young people who have, at least more latitude to, and how they run their life to smoke weed.
So now, addressing what you just mentioned, now how did you actually, the idea or the concept of your selling drugs, how did that come into play?
Well, I should say that despite the fact that I had a very loving childhood experience, grew up in a great family, all families are subject to their stresses. Just as my father's womanizing probably played some role in the initial dissolution of his relationship with my biological mother, my father definitely, got caught cheating on my adopted mother. So that was one of a number of different stressors that began to sort of corrode the love and foundation and put more stress on my family. My parents were both trying to make the transition in the early 1980s when there was a downturn in the economy from being full-time musicians who supported themselves and were able to provide me and my brothers with, a fairly nice household, to new positions in which they would have to start at the bottom with the entry-level gig and kind of work their way up to the top. So they were under a lot of financial duress at the time. I could recall, them just, discussing credit card bills and stuff like that that were weighing on them and trying to make special arrangements to find a way to, you know, satisfy, the creditors that they were dealing with. And so financial stresses, they both looked to make the transition to new occupations as there was an economic downturn in the early, in the 1980s, was compounded by revelations that my father had cheated on my mother. And so that, and a lot of times, man, our parents, despite their best efforts not to allow their personal hardships to influence their relationship with their kids. They're human beings. So, it puts stress on all of us. It puts stress on all of us. And so, and then on top of that, we were becoming adolescents. We were no longer kids, right? And we wanted to do things our way. You could best believe that my mother and father did not approve me, smoking weed, or I come in the house at 14, 15. I remember I would come in the house, I would be looking high as hell, eyes all bloodshot and everything. And I know my mother was deeply concerned, and she would, get on my case. And you can imagine I wasn't doing no schoolwork. I was like the typical adolescent, man, who just is a problem. We was all problems. They were experiencing problems, and one of the problems they experienced was a growing kind of rebelliousness and independence on the part of their kids. And so 4 kids at that, like we all turned teenagers at the same time. And so it began to create a lot of turmoil in the household and led to disagreements, spats, arguments, fights between me and my parents, and especially my mom. And
so, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine, man. I'm sorry. You had such discipline, brother. I didn't see a single facial movement.
No, because I'm listening. I'm deeply engaged. So how does this translate to how does the turmoil translate to your selling drugs?
Well, because there were a lot of fights. By the time I entered into my teenage years, it was not uncommon for fights in my household between my mom and my brothers and my sister to eventuate with one of us getting thrown out the house. So we were, and I don't know what your teenage years were like, but there was a lot of get out my house in my household. And so, and I could remember quite a few times shacking up with friends in the area, but that's domestic instability. And as you're making the transition from adolescence into early adulthood yourself, invitations to leave the house and to find a way to make it on your own will cause you to, resort to whatever means are necessary. And so it was a pattern. It was, both me and my 2 brothers who all, fought with my moms to one degree or the other during our adolescent years, all went out on the streets and eventually hustled. So we were like 16, 17. I made it out the house, I should say. I had bouts where I was thrown out the house, but I made it out the house. I graduated from high school without getting permanently kicked out the house. But those times that I was, the time that I no longer spent at home in my immediate neighborhood allowed me to, explore, the other side, life on the other side of the tracks on the other side of the street, so to speak. And so, we'll go out there, hustle, start dealing with harder drugs too, I should say.
So you were a kid when your introduction to kind of hustling, you were a kid when your first introduction.
So yeah, when I was about 14 or 15, although I lived a very sheltered life as a Catholic school boy who grew up in a nice, orderly, middle-class neighborhood in the heights of Mount Vernon. by the time I was about 14 or 15, I, had begun to explore the broader city. Mount Vernon is only 4.4 square miles, and the south side of Mount Vernon is a stone's throw away, little 10, 15-minute walk, and you're on the other side of town where everything's going down. And so I began to hang out with cats on the south side. I also graduated from Catholic school and went to public school, to the public high school, Mount Vernon High School. And so the combination of graduating to high school, gaining the freedom that comes with adolescence to travel farther and farther from my own home, and experimenting with all kind of just doing my thing, while outside of my parents' supervision. Soon enough, exposed me to life of the hustle. Who was hustling on the streets of Mount Vernon, and those was my dudes. All the cats who was hustling in Mount Vernon in the early, even though they were from the south side and I was from the Heights, they quickly, I became part of that network. They became part of my friendship circle, and I was sort of out there.
So you fell into it. It wasn't a generational type of thing like somebody, your uncles or anybody else was hustling. You fell into it.
Yeah, I
fell into the life.
And it really what it was, man, is that by the time we hit 14, 15, 16, there were not a lot of opportunities to earn legitimate funds in the city of Mount Vernon. I should say that as part of my upbringing, my parents insisted that we have jobs, and there was no better proof of it than I was one of the last generation of newsboys. So this was at a time when print newspapers enjoyed wide circulation, and I used to serve as a newspaper boy to our local hometown newspaper, the Daily Argus, which is now essentially Low HUD newspaper. And so I worked as a newsboy. Eventually, when I got my working papers as a teenager, at around the age of 14, I started to, do summer jobs, had a little part-time job after school, working in McDonald's, but none of those jobs can provide, then or now, can provide a person with, means to support their own household. And it's, they don't pay well at all. And so somehow I fell into doing things that paid a little better than that.
Okay, so you graduate from Mount Vernon High School.
Right, in 85.
You're in 85. So technically, now you're a man as far as, were you 18 yet?
I was turning 18. I was 17 when I graduated from Mount Vernon High School.
So 18 years old, you're a man now. What do you do next after high school?
So, at this time, by the time I had turned a senior, in my junior and senior year in high school, I was starting to sell drugs. I used to sell dust on the south side of Mount Vernon, on 3rd Street and 4th Avenue, around 3rd Street and 4th Avenue, in front of some landmarks that only, those of my generation will remember: Big Lou's, Shabazz, Eatery. And I was selling drugs, and actually many of my close friends, associates, even my family members were already starting to get locked up. My brother Rasan, Frank, had by this time he would have gotten locked up for something. And then in my senior year, when I was selling dust while attending Mount Vernon High School, my man Big Talk, Tyrone Talkinson, also got locked up. And so once my man got locked up, I kind of he was my immediate link to life on the south side. And so I fell back. I had enrolled in the Army, signed up while in high school to go to the Army, and had made plans to go to the Army. And so when I graduated from high school, I went to the Army. I was in the Army before I had turned 18. I was at boot camp before I turned 18. in Fort Dix, New Jersey.
All right. So how long were you actually, did you retire from the Army? How did the Army play out for you?
Well, it didn't. I forced the Army to give me a discharge under general conditions within the span of a year. And I will say, listen, these are some of the conventional pathways that are open to young people, especially young men. And so I started on that first pathway, which was somewhat easy. It doesn't take a lot of planning and complex decision making. In order to decide to join the Army, I went and took the ASVAB exam, did well on it, and was assigned to be a computer programmer in the Army. Now, I should say that one of the downsides of joining the armed services, of course, is that you're joining a highly regimented, even authoritarian institution in which your superiors have almost limitless control over, your everyday life. And, I got into some trouble in the Army essentially, and, it wasn't resolved on terms that were acceptable to me, and so I essentially forced them to let me out of the Army. I went in the Army in 85, and I came out of the Army in 1986. And so 1986 is an especially important year in my life because when I left the Army, I had absolutely no way of supporting myself and returned back to Mount Vernon, returned back to New York without my parents' knowledge. I didn't even tell them that I had essentially forced the Army to, kick me out. And so, I came back to Mount Vernon with nothing. Then I really had nothing, and then I was really a grown man who now had to face with the imperative of finding food, clothing, and shelter immediately to, secure myself. So that's really when I started selling drugs for real.
Okay, so you're selling drugs. So when you came back to the Army, did you just jump right back in the game, or were you like, well, let me try?
No, immediately I came home and I didn't have a home. I didn't have a home to go to. And I didn't want to turn to my parents and ask them could I come to their house. And so I came home with no place to come to and started selling drugs. I didn't know what I was going to do, to be honest with you, Brian, and I'll tell you the story because, this is the truth. This is how this happened. I came home, booked a flight home, took public transportation from LaGuardia Airport, got off the train at 241st Street, and was walking home with my rucksack on my back down First Street. And as I'm walking down First Street, who do I run into but my youngest brother, Unique Parrish. He's with his girl. He looking all flossy. Now I'm going to tell you the story like it is. He looking all flossy. Got on, then we used to wear like the polyester knit slacks. Cass was wearing slacks then. And, liven it up though. So he, had on some yellow, polyester slacks with I don't know, you don't remember the Coca-Cola shirts. Coca-Cola shirts used to be very popular in the hip-hop community in the mid-'80s, 86, 87. There's a song that I put on my Coca-Cola. It was getting kind of chilly when, who's in the store but Begging Billy, and all of your audience members will remember that song. And that's, everyone was running around with the Coca-Cola. And so my brother had on the yellow polyester knit joints, baggy joints with a Coca-Cola shirt and some white and yellow Nikes. And we'd seen him, and he was with his girl, and we saw each other. I brought him up to speed. Yo, son, I'm home. He's like, yo, well, listen, I'm going to put you on. You get some bread. I know you need to get some bread. I'm going to put you on. I got something for you. And he knew that I had sold dust before. So, it wasn't totally foreign to me. And this was just when the crack trade was just taking off, man. So it was plenty of money to be made. And that's actually how I got into selling drugs. Within 24 hours, I was selling some crack somewhere in the city of Mount Vernon.
So what was the so you're in the game now? What was a typical day like for you? Not minute to minute, but like what's the typical day in the life of the day in your life of as a hustler?
Well, oftentimes people who are hustling, especially those who are making an initial foray into the life, are impelled by, financial motives because they lack money. And so oftentimes you'll find that at least for me, it was marked by a whirlwind of activity because it was an endless hustle. Then hustling allowed for a lot of people with entrepreneurial sort of inclinations to follow the classic capitalist model of buying low and selling high. And you would buy low, you go down to Manhattan around, the epicenter of the coke trade in New York City was 145th and Broadway in Manhattan. So we go down to 145th, we get us some coke or crack at sharply discounted price as compared to what it was selling for in the streets in Westchester County. And you just come uptown and you'd either bottle up or you'd buy you some bottles and just get out there and start hustling. So that was often what it was like for me. I'm going to be honest with you. I say this with all sincerity, that I really learned my work ethic and hard work hustling. And I know this seems counterintuitive to many people because there is a widespread conception that hustling is so lucrative that money just falls off the trees and it's a disincentive for people to work hard. And that's not the case, right? The real people who want to succeed at hustling often are sort of proto-capitalists who are doing what capitalists do. They buy low and they sell high, and that requires that you know your market, you travel to your market. So, it could be an hour downtown in the morning, go down and cop and, get you whatever like paraphernalia you need, come uptown, bottle up your bottles, begin to maybe a little bit of marketing because you'd have to make choices about what kind of packaging you're going to use in order to set your product apart from that of your competitors. You'd have to assemble a team of, of workers who would help you to maybe knock off. In some cases, it could be 3, 4, 500 bottles a day, easy. So, and on top of that, just the endless drive and perseverance that comes with trying to turn nothing into something was really, I think, characteristic of, the time early days that I had in the streets hustling. I think for a lot of people, that does sort of characterize their day.
So what were some of the experiences that you had in the street where you ultimately decided that was not the path for you?
So look, the life of the hustle is hard. That's what I wanted to underscore, that you have to really put in a tremendous amount of effort. I've stayed up days on end when I was hustling, not on any serious drugs, smoke some weed. But you might stay up days on end hustling, right? In all kind of weather. I could remember being outside, like, oh man, when I was hustling when I first started, 86, 87, those winters were brutal. So I could remember being outside 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning and the hawk just bearing down on us at sub-zero temperatures. So it was not an easy life by any means, just the kind of effort that you really had to put into it. And the realization that even though you might periodically get a windfall, for many people in the life of a hustle, it is very uneven in terms of the money that you generate, precisely because you find yourself under constant scrutiny from two forces that mean you no good. This could be fellow hustlers, or especially cats who's all kind of people on the street is going to try to get over on you. Could be your fellow hustlers who's competitors. It could be bona fide stick-up kids who's going to try to rob you if you get bread. Or it could just be all of the addicts and people that you're going to deal with who want to get high and going to try to get over on you if they at all can. So my sense always, Brian, was that, although I was aware that I could generate a considerable amount of money in a relatively short amount of time, that could give me the nest egg that I needed to establish a more stable, permanent residence, get an apartment of my own. I also realized over the months and then over the years that there was a definite ceiling on the amount of riches that most people accumulate. Because when you're hustling, and this happened a lot in the crack game, people would steal from you, and even the workers. Let me step back. The way that hustling usually works is that you get on the street, and the cat who sells drugs, him or herself, is not the immediate point of contact for all kind of transactions that are made. Instead, you usually have a core of addicts who have serious addictions themselves, who can't hold down a job or anything else, and so their job is to be a part of the drug trade. They're going to be your runners. They're going to help you to get customers and direct customers to you, and that's going to allow them to continue to supply their addiction. So those people who would help you, so they help you one moment and they hurt you the next, because if they could steal from you, they would. So they would steal from you. Your competitors, and you might have all kind of beefs. It's going to prevent you from coming up. Robbers might steal from you, but most importantly, the police is going to get you. And once you are apprehended by the police and you are subject to charges, this changes the entire dynamic, because now you find yourself under the threat of going to jail, and the only way that you can, stave that off is by paying high-priced lawyers to represent you in court. So between those three forces, addicts who is trying to get over and rob and steal from you, your competitors, robbers, and then the legal system that's going to drain you of your money, I think in short order, a lot of people realize, I certainly realized, that this was a futile cause almost.
So your leaving part and parcel was a business decision?
Yeah, you kind of, I don't know anyone who really succeeded in the game, I'm going to be honest with you. No, I do know a few people, but the overwhelming number of people, no. They would be like, it's not worth it.
I was going to say to know people that have demonstrated that the risk was worth the reward. I would venture to say that there are not many examples of the risk being worth the reward.
Not in the sum total of life. Mm-mm.
As you're hustling, when's the first time, how long did it take for you to get arrested when you first got in the game?
It took probably about, maybe it took about 7 months, but.
So you was chilling for 7 months. You was getting your money, you was living the life for 7 months until you first met with law enforcement.
Nah. You want me to, so this is what it is, because I started hustling hard maybe in sometime early 1987. I might have came home for a little bit, and maybe in August of '86, I saw my little brother started hustling a little bit. But I think I went back to Texas and stayed with my girl and for another 6 months, and then came back home. So it was about 87 that, like, I'm really hustling hard for real here. And so the thing of it is, and you know, this is an important element of my story, is that when I really started making a concerted effort, when I started to go hard, hustling in the streets, almost immediately, within about a week or two, I was shot.
Wow, so you got shot before you were ever...
Before I got arrested. Absolutely.
Thanks for listening to the We Don't Believe You podcast with your host, Brian McCoy. We hope you feel enlightened and empowered by our show. Please visit our YouTube channel at We Don't Believe You and our socials at We Don't Believe You on Facebook and Nah Don't Believe You on Twitter X. Please subscribe and share our podcast. Peace.